I'm Stacy-Marie Ishmael, managing editor of crypto for Bloomberg News. And this is Bloomberg Crypto, a new daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio. It's Friday, June 3rd. Cryptocurrencies are increasingly popular as investments. Everyone from traders on Reddit to big institutional shops like Fidelity seem to have a crypto strategy. But what happens when the people investing in this asset class are also the ones in charge of regulating it? Senators like Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania.
So I'm just asking the SEC to provide some clarity. Let us know. Why do you think this is a security? What are the characteristics?
And Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, known to many as somewhat of a Bitcoin evangelist.
So I'm very confident that Bitcoin will withstand the test of time.
Both hold crypto investments, while also considering who and how might potentially regulate this asset class. So what are the ethical implications when members of Congress buy and hold Bitcoin? Today, I speak with Bloomberg reporter Akayla Gardner about how to regulate the regulators. Welcome, Akayla.
Thank you, Stacy-Marie.
Great to have you. So, first of all, you've been reporting on this. Tell me a little bit about your story, what you found so far, what's interesting.
So basically, we got some data from a research organization called 2IQ, and they track the trading habits of Congress members and really compile the things that they're investing in. And so what they found is about $1.8 million worth of crypto-related investments owned by members of Congress. And so those include stocks that are related to crypto, like Coinbase, Block, which obviously offer trading. And that also includes cryptocurrencies like your Bitcoin, your Ethereum, Dogecoin, and investments in crypto investment funds. And what's interesting about this is all the funds that were invested in are owned by Grayscale, which is one of the biggest crypto asset managers. And there's about 2 or 3 Congress members who have holdings in Grayscale investment funds.
Got it. So you said a couple of things that I find really interesting, and I want to start with a kind of a question, which is, as you were reporting this, were you surprised by either the size of the investments or, maybe you thought it was small, maybe you thought it was big, or even just the names of the folks who were popping up in this data set?
I think what was interesting is just the amount. There was 21 members in total who fall under that, 11 Democrats, 10 Republicans. But more interesting, perhaps, was the amount of senators, representatives who hold cryptocurrencies, because obviously you have to kind of go out of your way to invest in those. Some of the stocks are just a part of
a 401k or
exactly a fund that they might have that's managed by a third party. But that number was particularly interesting. The people that actually own Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some even fringe names like Basic Attention Token, like those investments were really interesting. And then also the investment funds, because they're becoming more popular, but still they're not as widely held as your 401ks, your retirement savings.
Got it. So folks in Congress own lots of things all the time. They have access to lots of information all the time. With crypto and with some of what you're describing, some of the conflicts are perhaps less immediate, right? As you've identified, this is still a growing asset class. It's much less widespread. But this is also an asset class that is under intense regulatory scrutiny right now. And some of these folks, some of these members may have themselves be considering sponsoring bills about regulating crypto, or, are on committees that are interested in regulating crypto. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you found on that angle?
I think you bring up an interesting point, which is this debate has kind of happened for a long time, whether it's tech stocks or defense stocks. There's always been questions, should you serve on the Committee of Armed Services and also hold defense stocks? And the same thing goes for tech. And so it's really interesting about crypto, particularly because it's still so early in that process of regulation. And the 2 committees, or the 2 areas of committees, both in the Senate and the House, that we looked at in this story was the Committee of Agriculture and the Committee of Banking. And those go under different names, under different chambers. But those committees are particularly important because they oversee the SEC and the CFTC.
The 2 biggest potential regulators for crypto at the moment in the U.S.
Exactly. There's a bit of a tug of war right now about which cryptocurrencies are considered commodities and which are considered securities. And different Congress members have different motivations for why they want one regulator to take more control than another. And so it was definitely interesting. 7 of the members that we found in this study are part of those committees. So you have to consider how their investments might play into their decision making, because whether we like it or not, regulation does have an impact on the market and on the prices. And oftentimes when big regulatory actions come out, it can move the needle on whichever coins of the day. And that's something that's definitely being raised with our story.
So one thing we should note is none of this is technically illegal, right? There's no rule that says you're not allowed, if you're thinking about a bill that regulates Bitcoin miners, to hold or not hold Bitcoin. I know folks have very strong opinions about whether there should in fact be more rules, but I'm interested in hearing what are the members themselves saying about any of this?
Well, some of the big names in this story was Senator Pat Toomey, who owns investments in Grayscale.
Speaking of Senator Toomey, he was on CNBC recently talking about regulating crypto. Let's listen to that.
I'm not in the camp that thinks that there should never be any kind of regulation over any cryptocurrency. That's not my position at all. But I do think there needs to be transparency and objectivity about what we're doing here. And the SEC is taking enforcement actions without first having laid out how they interpret, how they apply existing securities law to this really, really important and innovative new category of finance.
His spokesperson says crypto makes up less than 1% of his portfolio, but he explicitly said he does not support the kind of proposals that are out there right now that specifically ban individual investments in stocks or other categories, bonds, and something like crypto might fall under that as well, because he doesn't want it to deter people who could potentially run for Congress or for Senate. So he sees it as there's just too much in the economy that Congress oversees to restrict any of these. But we should say some of these proposals, there's multiple out there, have support from both parties. There's bipartisan support for some of these proposals that would ban these individual investments. But yeah, a lot of the people we spoke to, who, especially people who have stocks like Coinbase and Block, said, you know, my portfolio is managed by someone else. But even the thought or the realization of knowing that those things could be in their portfolio could still impact their decision making.
When we return, a look at another crypto enthusiast who also happens to be a sitting senator, Wyoming's Cynthia Lummis. We'll be right back. Okay, so, in the story you mention the SEC and the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, are still figuring out this kind of regulatory context. It's a pretty big tug of war between the two committees that you referenced, the Senate Banking and Agriculture. Do you find that there were more members from those particular committees than you were expecting, or any individual ones other than Toomey?
Another person is Senator Lummis. She's been a longtime investor in Bitcoin. She's very outspoken about her belief that Bitcoin and crypto is an avenue for freedom. And she's also putting forth a bill that would set out some guidelines for the SEC and the CFTC under which they can regulate certain spot markets, futures markets. And that's something that's really interesting because she's also partnering with somebody on ag. She sits on the banking committee with Toomey as well.
Well, Akayla, we actually have a clip of Senator Lummis, thanks to our producers. Here's what she had to say recently on Meet the Press about the need for crypto regulation.
So I'm very confident that Bitcoin will withstand the test of time. I'm not confident that every other digital asset that's out there has the same qualities of permanence and complete decentralization. So there's some fraud that's going to occur, which is why I think it's so important for the United States to create a regulatory framework that allows for innovation, but still creates rules of the road that protect individual privacy, but that also have disclosure components to them so the purchaser knows what they're getting.
And you just have to wonder, someone who holds Bitcoin for a long time and her range that she reported is between 50,000 and 100,000 in value of the Bitcoin that she holds. So that's a pretty big number.
And a pretty big range.
A pretty big range as well, yes. We should note that as well, that all of the representatives have to report a range in the assets that they hold, regardless of whether they're crypto or not. And so that 1.8 million number is a range of all of the things that they reported. So that's a particularly interesting one because you have someone who's outspoken about where she believes certain things should fall under, and you have to think about how that could potentially impact her holdings.
Thank you. One other thing about these reports is, as you say, it represents the value of the crypto held at that moment in time. So one of the fun/challenging things about crypto as an asset class is it's really volatile. And so if we were having this conversation in 2 months, you could be saying that that 1.8 million number is a lot bigger or a lot smaller, even if none of the members had acquired or sold any crypto. As a reporter, do you find that covering this asset class is more or less challenging because of this volatility and the kinds of data that you have to be looking at to really get the full story?
I think that's an interesting question, especially because Bitcoin right now is trading in such a tight range. It's hard to know how much their assets are really valued because they don't have to report exactly how much they hold. But the thing to note is it has to be over at least $1,000. So these ranges are pretty wide, but we don't actually have a full picture of how much they're investing in, whether it's these individual tokens or the stocks. We don't have that full picture to see how much it's impacting. And so that's why we have to reach out to these members and ask them, hey, can you give us a better idea so we can let readers know what exactly your holdings entail? So that's like something like Senator Toomey telling us that it's 1% of his asset class. It gives us a better picture. Okay, this is how much this could potentially impact him personally. I should say a lot of the other members gave much less detail into those amounts, but that's something that would be great to have if we could have that data.
Yeah, would love just a list of the wallet addresses of all of the different members. That would be fantastic and definitely make our lives easier. So tell me, who are the players and what is the partisan or bipartisan representation that you're seeing?
So we found 21 members of Congress own crypto-related investments. And so that includes stocks like Coinbase and Block. It also includes cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and these crypto investment funds, which are all under Grayscale, which happen to be issued by Grayscale. And we found that the breakdown of that is Democrats, Republicans is 11-10. Democrats were much more likely to own these stocks as a part of perhaps like a widely held fund or an education trust. Another thing to mention too, these reportings also include the holdings of their spouses, perhaps their children as well.
It's the household.
Exactly. But the kind of differences is definitely Democrats tend to own more of the stocks, while Republicans happen to dabble more in the cryptocurrencies and the funds.
I want to also, you mentioned there's kind of both bipartisan support and bipartisan rejection of some of these various proposals. Can you tell me a little bit more about any of the Dems that popped up in this data set?
One Democrat who invested in, we call this category like cryptocurrencies or funds focused specifically on crypto. So that Democrat was Marie Newman. She had investments in a Grayscale fund. She declined to comment for this story. But yeah, again, it's interesting to see the amount of people that are specifically gravitating towards Grayscale. That could say something about why people are choosing this. And what's interesting about Grayscale is they have a big lobbying effort right now for the SEC to approve.
Lots of comment letters.
Exactly, to approve a spot Bitcoin ETF. So they're having a really big push for that right now. And you have to think about if members are investing in Grayscale, how does that impact their thinking when they're communicating with regulators, when regulators are coming to the House or the Senate to be questioned. And that's something important to talk about, too, is this relationship between the regulators and Congress. While they're technically separate, Congress votes them in, they can organize hearings, they have tremendous agenda-setting powers. And so even though there's a separate relationship, there's still very much communication throughout the year. And Congress members are constantly letting them know what they think is the best idea. And if they should choose to make regulation, that would be law over anything the regulators do individually. And so that's another thing is, will Congress actually put legislation in place in terms of crypto, or will the regulators kind of work themselves out with different actions? I talked to one lawyer who said he thinks it's less likely that we'll see legislation and more likely that regulators will just kind of come out with their own stances and kind of work it out. There's a lot of legal implications too. So there's
the $1 trillion question.
Exactly. All of these things are kind of working themselves out, but we can't negate the fact that Congress has this tremendous agenda-setting power.
You can find more of Akayla Gardner's reporting on Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Terminal, and on Twitter at Gardner Akayla. On the next episode of Bloomberg Crypto, sometimes it's good to define our terms, even for those of us who do this for a living. Join me Monday for a conversation with Bloomberg's Hannah Miller and Vildana Hodrick. We'll be reviewing their handy crypto glossary. You'll hear about terms like staking, bridges, and more. I'm Stacy-Marie Ishmael, and this is Bloomberg Crypto, a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio. For more shows from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Email your comments, questions, or suggestions to crypto@bloomberg.net, and you'll find us on Twitter @crypto. The producer and editor of this episode is Vicky Vergalina. Our engineer is Blake Maples. Original music by Leo Sidran. Bloomberg's head of podcasts is Francesca Levy.